Hey everyone, welcome to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, the podcast for software sales professionals who want to sell better. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, make Software Sales Simplified your go-to resource for actionable insights and real-world strategies. Join us right here where you get your favorite podcasts, and we'll move to success together. I'm your host, Matt Long, and I'm joined with my esteemed colleague, Kevin Donville.
How you doing, folks? Good to see you today.
And together we have over 50 years of enterprise software sales experience. And we wrote a book about that as well and our approach to sales, which is Winning Faster, the MOVE framework for enterprise sales success. And you can see a link to it in our description of the podcast here. Today, we're joined by an old friend and colleague of ours, JD Miller. JD and I first met 25 plus years ago at a startup in Silicon Valley called Introspect. And I think, JD, you were one of the first SEs that were hired there. I think it might have been you, David Hind, Roy Ginger, and I think I was the next one. There might have been one more, but it was very early on. But anyway, how are you doing today, JD?
Good, and thanks for having me. You're right. My first job as a 24-year-old, and I think Introspect had great offices in California and in Washington, D.C., and I was the first hire right in the middle, right in Chicago, as a sales engineer who could travel to either coast fairly equally.
Right. And you already had a PhD at that point. Is that right?
I was working on it. So I had actually gone to school thinking I was going to be a lawyer. And then after an internship in the Clinton White House, realized that did not seem like a fun job to me. And so I had a double major in communication and philosophy with a minor in literature, and knew I wasn't going to be a professional literature person, wasn't going to be a professional philosopher, which left the communication degree. And in the 90s, it was all about what is communication like online, which led me to a master's and then a job at a small.com.
Wow. Okay. I actually never knew what your PhD was in. I just thought it's just some fancy initials you throw after your name there, but I assumed it was for something.
Well, you can actually type anything you want on a business card, right? No, but it's kind of fun. So I was looking at social networks, and we knew how social networks were formed in the physical world. You can use it online. You can see who emails whom and find opinion leaders. And kind of now today, people use it to run political campaigns or public health campaigns, figuring out who are influencers that can shape the opinion of their communities in the world.
Well, it's very appropriate because our first, the company we work for, Introspect, was a collaborative knowledge management platform.
That's
So
right.
basically, I think some of the early stages of kind of connecting networks of people and information and all that in a very seamless way, I still think that platform and solution is way ahead of its time. And sometimes I still wish I had it. So I just pass notes into and other things and web links and all that stuff. And it's kind of organize it in a way that's findable. But I guess AI is going to be replacing a lot of that eventually.
The next revolution.
Well, anyway, I'm glad to have you on here today. We wanted to talk a little bit about kind of your journey, because you did start as an SE and then eventually transition to an AE and then eventually CRO and to what you're doing today. But I'm just curious about kind of your journey. I mean, what was it that made you transition or want to transition from a SE to an AE after a while?
Yeah. So, early in my career, I began as a sales engineer, and I think it was actually a favorite job I ever did because you're right in the heat of all of the sales cycles, but maybe there's not quite as much pressure on the SE that if you don't make your quota, you're not going to be fired in the same way that the quota carrier does. But I was partnered with a number of good AEs. And then there was a stint in my career where I was partnered with an AE who wasn't doing so well. And after a while, I realized we're in all the same meetings together. We've been trained on the same processes. We understand all the same ways to approach these deals. And increasingly, it was an AE who was just having me show up and do my thing and then, close out the deal. And I thought at the end of the day, I thought, you're making twice as much commission as I am, and I'm doing all the work. And the only kind of nuance is you have to cold call for yourself and you have to negotiate a contract at the end. So if I could learn those two things, I could really increase my income. And so when they eventually got moved out of the organization, I raised my hand and said, I'd like to, dip a toe in my waters and see if I could do it well. And it began a career of quota carrying sales and then kind of moving up the ranks through sales management and company leadership.
Just curious about, you said, learning how to cold call and negotiate. What was your process for learning that and getting ramped up in that area? Was it just doing it, or did you actually look to other people and mentors to help you or read things? What was your process like?
Working with mentors for sure. I talked to my dad, who is a surgeon, and I asked him one day, how did you learn to do surgery? And he said, we had this process called watch one, do one, teach one. Now, he went to med school in the 60s, so I hope that we give people a little bit more than one visual experience before we hand the scalpel over.
Just start cutting.
But actually, that training was really good for me as a seller, and one that I use with my own teams as well, is sit and watch someone do it really effectively, then ask them to sit in the other seat where you can do it, and they're there as a good kind of backup and backstop in case you fall. And then eventually go try and document what you did so you can teach other people to do it. And so, I had a number of mentors on the cold calling process who taught me a lot about multi-touch engagements and the best way to get people to answer the phone. It was the early 2000s. And so, we were conference calling together, and I had someone actually listening on the back end and helping me navigate phone trees and all of those things. And then eventually all the rest of the sales process as well, negotiating a contract or getting ready for those meetings, having a trusted mentor by my side through those first couple was really helpful for me.
Yeah, well, for the young people that are listening, a phone is something where you actually call someone and you talk to them live. And it's a conversation.
Well,
But
you do bring up an interesting point, though, Matt. I mean, so much has changed in the way that we do our day-to-day work as sellers these days. JD, if you had to go and do that all over again today, what would you even be able to? And what would that path have to look like? What kind of replacements for older types of steps would you be looking for?
Yeah, so I was going to say, now with the teams that I work with, and today I work for a private equity firm that invests in tech companies, and I'm a sales and marketing coach for their leaders. But I think technology is really helping so much of that, because it's so natural now for AI tools to be dialed into your call as a note taker. And so many of them now can be trained on your sales methodology and pop up in real time on your screen a message that says, hey, your customer just gave you this objection. Here's the 3 bullet points of how you're supposed to respond to that. And then I also see a lot of folks using the recordings as sort of game tapes after the fact, where maybe we'll run a competition that we're working on how to get to the economic buyer and ask everyone to sort of submit, the best call or the best snippet of the call of them doing that work. And that's really easy to share, kind of the best calls from a large sales team quickly and put that right back in the training guide. So the next new hire can hear, here's our top seller doing this particular skill.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the kind of the video recording technologies and things like that, because not just the transcription ones, those are helpful for note taking, but the ones where you could actually listen to it and replay it and see it, because there's no better way to up your game than to get over the cringe factor of watching and listening to yourself. And then once you're over that, just like, well, that was brilliant. That sucked. It's like, and then, how can you change that going forward? So I imagine that's a big tool for you now as a sales leader in terms of being able to, mirror good behavior across the organization and set it out without having to make someone do a whole training session and things like that.
Absolutely. And for so many functions. So during COVID, I worked for a company that was selling reimbursement solutions for people that get in their cars and drive for work. And all of a sudden, COVID, no one was getting in their car and driving for work. And we really quickly put together a new product that was about how do you reimburse people for their home offices. And the company actually launched that product in about 3 weeks following the COVID shutdown. But I had 150 sellers who, were pitching this new product for the first time ever. And having that kind of call recording software helped us really quickly in the first 2-3 weeks of trying to pitch this new solution, hear it from everyone out in the field, get real-time feedback on the sort of objections customers had and figure out how everyone was, kind of navigating on the fly, and then really quickly identify this is the right way to answer this question. This is the right way to pitch this product or position this feature set, and have that shared with everyone really quickly. So we learned really fast because we could hear everyone all at once and then disseminate the learnings to the rest of the team really quickly.
Now, I want to get back a little bit just to your journey. So you became an AE. What was it that you really liked about that role, or you discovered that you didn't know ahead of time into getting into that role that you really liked?
So, I think the exciting thing about sales is most salespeople and sales engineers, we're naturally friendly people. We love to have great conversations. And as an AE, I got to be exposed to so many different kinds of businesses. It started with web content management software, and then it was CRM software, which, applies to car manufacturers and law firms and, pharmaceutical sales reps and all of these different kind of businesses. So as an AE, I really loved the ability to have every day be different and have every day be one that I can meet a new kind of person, learn something really interesting about their profession, about the business they operate in, and then, bring a solution that's actually going to make them better at what they do was what I found super appealing about that role.
And then how did you transition into sales leadership?
So I had worked at a company that was acquired by LexisNexis, a big legal publisher, and they had 6,000 salespeople. And so this huge training infrastructure in place that early on, one of my mentors tapped me and said, one day we think you could be a leader of this company. And so they enrolled me in a year-long sales leadership boot camp. And that says, we understand you're an AE today, and maybe you're going to be an AE for a long time. But over the next year, we're going to connect you with a mentor who's a leader of a different part of the business. We're going to send you all of this training about how do you do communication, how do you read the P&L of the business and understand the finance piece. And it was just this really, low-risk journey of learning about what the rest of the company looks like and what that leadership role looked like without actually having to be in the role yet myself. And at the end of that year, I realized I really wanted to do it. I also realized I didn't want to do it at LexisNexis. And so another company took a risk and hired me as a sales and marketing leader for a consulting company in Chicago. And that was the first of what became a long management career.
Yeah, I guess not too many companies are willing to take risks these days. So you're very fortunate.
And I was fortunate as a consulting company that actually had implemented both of the previous products that I had worked with. So they knew me as a seller, even though I hadn't worked for them. We had a 5-6 year relationship that when their next kind of frontline manager role came up, they took the risk.
Yeah, I think as a little aside, in this very difficult hiring culture right now in terms of getting jobs and things like that, I think the best advice obviously is, people in your network and people who know your work product are the best people to go to. So that's just a little point I want to make for those of you that still might be looking out there or feeling it's a little daunting right now. Let's talk a little bit about your transition now, because you are kind of doing a CRO, I'll say for hire, but you kind of step in or inserted into companies through is it private equity that you're working for now?
So across my career, I had worked at 6 companies that were owned by private equity firms. And I always describe private equity as sort of like flipping a house. They buy a company that hopefully has good bones, but one that they know that they can do some work on and improve so that they can sell it a few years later for twice the price or more. And so I had been CRO 3 times. I had been CMO once and country president once. And the last time that I was CRO, I said, this is a lot of work. I think I want to shift my focus a little bit. And so I started to talk to the PE firms about, what's it like to be on your side of the table? And most private equity firms they call them operating partners, which are people who specialize in a function. Mine is sales and marketing. Some specialize in finance. Some specialize in product development. And so now when the PE firm buys your company, they have their board. Some of the board members have specific skills. And then in addition to those board members, they may also just have an operating partner, an operating advisor like me that says, one of the benefits you get is here's this expert in sales and marketing. And so he can be, or I can be the coach and mentor to the CRO or the CMO in that business. If they're going through something they've never seen before, hopefully I've seen it myself and have some advice. And because I'm connected with all the other CROs across the portfolio, if I don't know the answer, I know 35 other people who do. And so, it's this really interesting mix of a little bit of board service, a little bit of, being friends with leaders of companies. And then occasionally I am the glue that steps in if, a CRO suddenly departs the company or, something weird happens. I'm the first call that gets made of, come in and be the interim leader of this function, while we recruit the next person.
I see. So do they generally will try to keep the CRO and the sales team intact unless there's some big change that has to be made, and then you kind of work with them?
So every private equity firm has their own playbook. And I think if you're someone who's selling your company, it's really important to ask, what's your PE firm's philosophy on that? Where I'm working, Rothschild and Company's 5 Arrows, we do like to invest in our existing management teams. But one of the things that we talk a lot to those leaders about is the ages and stages of the company require different skill sets. And so if you were the person leading a company from $0 to $20 million in revenue, you were probably used to being a hands-on sales leader who's in all of those deals. When you get to 20 to 50 million in growth, certainly when you're trying to take a company from 50 million to 100 million in revenue every year, the skill of that leader has to shift from being the person who's in all of the deals to the person who's teaching other people how to do those deals, and then start thinking about strategic stuff like, new product roadmaps or M&A work. And so, if possible, we like to coach people through that journey, and that's a big part of my job. And then sometimes people say, I really don't like that. I really liked being the sales leader who knew every customer. And in that case, let's go find you another, startup company where you can flex that skill. And then we'll replace you out with someone else who's more comfortable with the next part of the journey.
What aspect of that in this portfolio of skills you're bringing to the table and the different flavors of engagement that you're having with these companies you're engaging with, what part of those do you find the most satisfying to you?
So, I love the individual development. I have an individual person that has followed me now through 3 different companies. He actually began as an individual contributor seller. Then he became a big sales manager. And now he's an SVP of sales operations. And so I love to see, and it's gone from a company that was, his first job was at a company that had $15 million in revenue. Now he's running RevOps for a company that's got $250 million revenue, $250 million in sales. And so I really love to see those individual career progressions is the most rewarding part. And then I think the part that I'm best at is repeatable processes. Over the course of my career, I've worked with the same kinds of companies all the time. It's always been B2B SaaS. Generally, my leadership has been 50 million to maybe 300 million in ARR. And so I've gotten really good at pattern recognition and identifying, here's the way that different things happen, document it. Here's a process that I can watch one, do one, teach one, show it to someone else, so that if you're experiencing that for the first time, I can hand you a template or show you a process that's going to make it easier for you to learn your first time around.
What's one of the first things you evaluate when you come in to a new company? I mean, how do you kind of assess what needs to happen, and what's the first kind of things that you will tackle to improve the sales or motion or marketing motion?
So for me as a sales leader, it always begins with the annual plan. And I didn't really understand this as a seller. I would get a quota every year. The quota would go up every year. And I had no idea where that came from. I just assumed someone picked a number out of the air. And I think actually there are some companies that the sales leader doesn't exactly know where the number came from. They've just signed up for a number and they're hoping they're going to get there. So the first thing that I'd like to do is look at the business's annual plan and say, what's the revenue growth we're looking for this year? Maybe this year we're trying to grow $30 million more than we did last year. And then I want to sit down and break that into each of the components, because it's not just show up and tell all of your sellers work really hard and I hope it's going to add up to 30 million. We actually want to break that down into, some of it is going to be selling new products to the install base. Some of that's going to be price increases in the install base. Some of that's going to get offset by some of our install base customers are going to leave and not renew, and we're going to be in a little bit of a hole. And then the same thing for new logo. What's my new logo team currently capable of doing? How many new logo people could I add to the team? And how long does their ramp period take? And all of that stuff. And ideally, we're able to kind of look at all of these pieces and add up to that $30 million revenue growth goal. And so that's the first place that I start is, can we articulate that? Or as we start digging into those details, are there gaps? And often we don't have the full math that gets us to the end result. And that's when the work begins, where we start to then game out. So what are we going to do about it? Do we hire people? Do we do new product? Or what's going to be the intervention that we have?
I imagine a big part of that is just scrutinizing the pipeline, right? Because I've seen so many times where these big numbers are forecasted because of big targets. But when you actually start looking at the deals in the pipeline, you realize half of those are just garbage that are not going to happen, right? Because people feel the pressure to, I have this big number. How am I going to make it? Well, here's the deals that are going to make it here, but half those aren't real. How much of that is part of your process as well in terms of due diligence and really understanding what's actually...
It's hugely important. And I think increasingly we're seeing a trend of people implementing revenue operations teams to help with that. And so someone who, or a team of someone's who participate in all of your forecast calls, can monitor all of that stuff. And then increasingly with technology, look for trends. It used to be that we would get on a forecast call and we'd talk about deals, and you would think that, Matt really knows what he's talking about, so his deals are probably going to close. And now, because of the call recording software and the great AI and the integrations with CRM, we can actually look for patterns and say, our best deals move through a 5-stage sales process on this velocity and with these things happening. And on my pipeline, a deal that normally we think should stay in stage 3 for 17 days, all of a sudden, these are the 5 deals that someone's forecasting that have been stuck in stage 3 for 20 or 25. And maybe that means that now we have to have a deal review about it or a really close inspection on it. And so I think revenue operations is becoming a really big key to sort of managing all of that inspection analysis and then connecting the sales leaders and coaches, sales enablement, to intervene in timely, practical ways.
How good are these solutions? Because I think in the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen a lot of these solutions now that are looking at kind of revenue, rev ops and things like that, taking these recordings and then analyzing them with AI and giving you, metrics and patterns and things like that. Do you find that those are pretty accurate and useful now, or are they just sort of a guideline that you use to then dig deeper?
I think it depends. I'm a huge fan of Clary. I've used it 3 times myself, and I recommend it to almost every one of my portfolio companies. Because in my experience, in 18 quarters of using Clary, I was able to forecast my quarter within $100,000, 17 out of those 18 quarters. The only one it missed was the one where COVID happened. But I think, again, I've been fortunate that I've worked in companies that have really large teams, lots of data sets. We were going through thousands of deals. And so here's this huge database that we can, do patterns on. I don't know how those tools work if you're only doing, 4 deals a year and you have a pipeline of 10 things. But I do recognize that they're starting to get the qualitative piece too, that with AI and listening to the calls, they're getting better at coaching. It's not been my experience, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't work.
I'm a little biased to those kinds of tools, JD, because I've worked with them in the past, and I've worked on teams that have implemented them either on the back end or on the front end when they've been dealing with the actual sales teams before. And a question that got posed to me once by another guest that was on our show was, what do you do when you're dealing with the board and you've been given forecasting guidance or goals and targets that have come down from the board that are completely unrealistic? I kind of have my own opinions about the answer to this question, but I'd love to hear yours. I feel that those kinds of tools, like the RevOp tools, are invaluable, building together the right data to go back to the board and help them formulate a winning strategy and a more achievable or more practical types of goals. Doing that by coming in with the information from things like these RevOps solutions, I find that to be useful. Have you ever done that, or what are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So as a board member myself, I know that I want clear communication from the team all the time. I actually get nervous that I worry that I might be pushing a number on a company and having a CRO sit on the other side and nod and say, oh yeah, we can do that, and be afraid to tell me that it's not possible, because that does nobody any good. If you're promising a number that you can't hit, all of a sudden, then we're looking at cost cutting, and that's when you've got layoffs and all the bad stuff that happens. So really do want us to have transparency. I do think that tools like these AI tools or RevOps tools or finance tools can help us get to a source of truth. And so for me and the CROs that I work with, I actually like to come up with a forecast using 3 different methods. I like the sales team to go through the standard process of commitment and best case and, their own roll up of what's in or out. Generally, those aren't very accurate, but it's really good process for the seller to go through, and it teaches them good skills. Then there's that whole stage weighting pipeline approach where we take, 20% of the stage 1s and 31% of stage 2s and all of that. That should be fed by past performance. So you should look back and say, I'm doing 31% of this stage because historically we've won 31% of those, not just because it felt like a good round number. And then finally, these AI tools like Clary come in and through its own machine learning, come up with really good numbers. And so I like to forecast using all three of those methods and then talk to my board about, we all agree, all of these methods all landed at this number, or actually two of these methods are landing here and one is way off. And let's have a good, interesting conversation about why that might be, so that we can collectively decide what do we think is really going to happen.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I mean, so after you figure out that the targets and the plans are accurate or an acceptable range, and that the pipeline should be supporting it, and the breakdown of your teams and where you're going is kind of all correct, but still you're not making number, then what's the next step then? Do you start evaluating individuals? Do you start evaluating the pitch, or a combination of all those? I mean, what's the next thing that you kind of unpack at that point?
All of the above. So one of the things that I really am an advocate for is outside win-loss analysis. Someone who is not part of the sale to call those customers and get just straight point of view on why did this company win or lose this deal? Because often someone's going to tell an independent third party something more honest and candid and actionable than your own seller will. As a seller myself, every time I've won a deal, I say it's because I was brilliant. Every time I've lost a deal, I say it's because the product was terrible and the price was wrong. So having an independent third party is a big piece of that. But then I think you can also start breaking down, what are all of the components that add up to a one deal. And so I wrote a book about this. So it's called The CRO's Guide to Winning in Private Equity. And it starts with a number, but it asks you to then build out, what are all the precursors that had to get us there? If our average deal size is $100,000 and I'm chasing $1 million quota, okay, I need to do 10 deals. What's my win rate? If I win 35% of my deals, I need to have 30 opportunities in play. And what was my connection rate, from people showing up to the demo, and how many calls did that take? And, what were the marketing metrics? And all of those kind of pieces are data points that we can start probing and looking at to see where was our assumption mismatched with what reality is. And that can start guiding us to where we need to make a change.
Do you have an example of, let's say, a time where they acquired a company, you came in and looked at it, and there was actually just one or two little tweaks you had to make to actually get things going in the right direction? I'm just curious if there's been a few times where it's like everything's almost there, but there's this that had to happen.
I mean, I think that happens all the time. Hopefully in the diligence process, we're buying a company that we already have a point of view on what is the thing that we can implement, whether it's a playbook or, sometimes it's companies doing really, really well and they know what their process is and they just need more money to double the size of their sales team so that they can do it at bigger scale or do it in another country or something like that. I also think a lot about my own experience as a CRO. I was hired into a company that was really clear in the recruiting process that they thought their sales process was broken. And they said, you're going to run sales and marketing both, but really you should expect that you're going to have to retrain all of the sellers, teach them new methodologies. You're probably going to have to turn over the whole sales team. And when I got in and looked under the covers, I actually realized it wasn't about sales at all. And then we started to think it was about marketing. And we looked at the marketing metrics, and it really wasn't about marketing at all either. They were getting good conversion rates and they were getting good volume. But the piece that was missing for us was the total deal size. And they had historically done deals that were, 150. The economy was shifting so that the companies that they were selling to were slightly smaller than they'd ever been before. So marketing was creating the same number of leads. They were converting to opportunities, at the same rate. Sales was closing them at the same rate and pretty high. But the total number of users of the contract at the end of the day had just, come down about 10, 15% because of economic uncertainty. And so it really informed us, first we had to look at all of those little components, but it really informed us so actually we need to shift our marketing message upstream. And people that we thought were not part of our ICP because they were too big, suddenly maybe are a little bit smaller companies than they used to be. And our solution might be a better fit for us than we used to think.
Awesome. So you basically are trying to maintain your ACV, but maybe have to go after slightly larger companies because of the changing economy in terms of what these companies could pay or afford. Is that right?
Absolutely. And, I picked up this metric along the way. People talk about sales velocity. Basically, it's a measure of how many dollars are you booking a day or a week or whatever your time horizon is. But the framework is how many opportunities you have times your win rate, times your deal size, divided by the length of your sales cycle. And that's going to yield how many dollars am I closing a day? And so a lot of times you're getting to the board report and you don't like the end results of that equation. Like, we didn't close enough dollars this day, this week, this month, this quarter. Go back to the equation and figure out, did you need more opportunities? Did you need to win more of them? Did you just need bigger ones, or did you just need to close them faster? And then that will inform what do we do, either training sellers new skills or putting new sellers on the street or spending more on marketing or, all sorts of interventions that might produce the result we're looking for.
JD, you brought up an interesting question, because I've been on a couple of different organizations where they've hit the accelerator really quickly and make the big leap forward with their plans for growth for the upcoming year. When companies succeed, what's the one thing they get right? And when they fail, what's the one thing they get wrong when they try to make that leap forward?
Right now, I'm working with an organization that's dealing with this exact question about when do we start investing in growth? And I think the big roadblock or gating factor for us is, can you articulate the real value of your product to your persona in your ICP? And in the organization I'm thinking of, they've got a great product. And they historically have hired people who are subject matter experts, and they can go out into their industry and talk to their prospects and say, look at this report. Isn't it great? Look at how this workflow thing happens. They're not having the articulation of why that actually equals ROI, but because they're really personally close to the industry and they're talking to people, they're bridging that gap. And then all of a sudden they're saying, we've had all this great success. Now what happens if we hire twice as many people? And before we start pouring in all of the money of doubling the size of the sales team, we have to be sure that we've really got good marketing messages, good websites, good training material, that if you hire JD, who didn't come from that industry, and how can you help JD really articulate that? It's actually not about, look at how great this report is and the color's blue, but it's how are you using this report to run your business? And that equals more sales or cost cut. And of course, that's where sales engineers are so critical too, is, they're often that translation between product feature set and true value of a business. And so I think that's one of the core things that I look at before we really start going down a massive growth path.
Well, it's a good transition point, because I do want to get into the SE role a little bit, because that's where you started. And now, I know that you know the value of SEs in the organization. In fact, one thing that I found interesting, going as I advanced in my career, is how many more sales leaders actually ask the SEs for their input on the pipeline and the deal, completely separate from the A's, because a lot of times it's like, that deal's not. There's no way in hell that deal's happening because of
That's right.
XYZ. The sales guy's like, yeah, they love it. We're going to go. So it's a nice checkpoint. But what do you see the roles of the SE team in these organizations that you're coming into? Do they always have an SE team? And if so, or if not, how do you kind of get that built into the system if they need one, obviously?
Yeah. I think it depends on the complexity of the solution you're selling. Right. I definitely have worked with tech companies that it's not terribly complicated. Sometimes it's very small transactional stuff that you can show someone a video online and you can self-serve and buy it yourself. But, whenever we're talking about something that's fundamentally going to change the way your business works, it's a good clue that we might want to have a sales engineer. So right now I'm sitting on the board of a company that does payroll solutions, and actually not just payroll, but larger, all sorts of HR solutions. And on the one hand, you might think like, well, everyone knows how to do payroll. You make an offer to someone and they have their rate and they get their paycheck at the end of the year. But actually the nuances of how are you calculating people's comp plans or their commission rates, or you've got tipped workers or hourly wage workers, maybe the way you've done that in the past needs to change. Maybe you're a company that's going through growth and you've been doing it wrong and you need someone to tell you how that's supposed to work. Or today we're hearing a lot of talk in the US about how are we going to treat taxes on tipped workers. And someone's going to need to actually consult to you about how do you comply with, whatever the new regulations look like. And I think sales engineers are great people who can not just say, here's the product and it's got a button that does this or that, but ask the next question about, why do you want it to do that thing? If it does or doesn't do it, is it smart for you to want it to do it? Or can I suggest a different, better way? I think some of the worst technologies I've seen implemented is, people will have a broken process that they've built a homegrown solution for, and then they go evaluate technology and say, can you redesign your solution to do exactly the same thing that we did with our existing broken process. And the best SEs are like, well, I can, but instead, let me show you a different way, a smarter way, a way that the rest of your industry is already kind of solving these problems. So I'm teaching you something new.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So you have all these kind of area or subject matter experts across the organization when you come in. Is the SE team ever part of that, or does that kind of roll up into your domain?
That generally lives with me in go-to-market functions. Yeah. I think you can have a debate about where do SEs belong in a reporting structure. Do they belong at the revenue leader at the CRO, or do they belong somewhere in the product organization or the implementation team? My experience is I always like them in sales, maybe because I grew up as an SE myself and I think I understand it really well. But regardless of where they sit, SEs are a very important glue between the commercial sales organization, the product management team, with here's the feedback of what people say they want or how they're using the solution. And then the marketing team about, here's the value that people are getting, or here are the kinds of questions that we're getting over and over again. And so I think SE is uniquely situated to talk to a whole lot of different people in a company.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of having them in on the revenue team and revenue driven as well, right? Coin operated. I think you get the best out of them because they, as an SC, I like winning deals. I like understanding them, but I like strategizing about how we're going to win this big complex deal, right? And being seen as a partner, but also having skin in the game was always highly motivating for me. Now, it doesn't work for all companies based upon the size of your transactions and the velocity of your deals and things like that. But I think, Kevin, you could probably agree, when we've had our most success and fun as SEs in an enterprise context, we're working with one or two, or maybe two or three top sellers, strategizing on all aspects of that deal and really feeling a sense of accomplishment, if not also a financial reward when we bring those deals home.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a good point that you're making there, Matt. And I think that that's a unique characteristic of the pre-sales person, the sales engineer. I'd love your thoughts on this, JD. A lot of the things we do, people are reaching out to us very often because they're looking to retool their pre-sales teams. There's a couple of common challenge points I've seen with organizations that are looking to scale that up. And one of the things I've experienced is they get people who are very technically savvy in how the application works, but they're not necessarily the people who have engaged with the market and understand the problem that feature fixes relative to the way that the people using it see it.
Right.
Do you see a similar kind of challenge? And what are some of the other types of maybe missteps people make when they start going, okay, our product is getting to an enterprise level now. We need to have this intermediary of the pre-sales person to come in. What other types of mistakes in execution have you seen there?
Yeah, I think that's one of them. Is certainly having an SE as a listening post that can really connect what the engineers do in the back room on a technical level to what the business buyers are doing at your customers, and having that translation is one really key thing. I think a lot of times SEs are also really good at understanding the words you can use to describe those processes. Because as an SE, we've all learned how to sit in a room and really listen to the nuance of when you ask the question, can that dropdown be in blue? Did you really care that it's blue, or does that mean something else to you? And did you want it blue because it has some other implication? I think, an SE brings the ability to kind of probe a little bit deeper and say, why do you want that to be in blue? What does that mean for you? If it was an orange, but it operated in this way, would that be just as good for you? I think without an SE who has that sort of kind of commercial mindset or problem-setting mindset, a lot of requirements can get lost in translation. There's often a disconnect between selling and teaching and what an SE's demo is supposed to be. A lot of times organizations get very proud of their technology because it's a great solution and it can do all these different things. But they think that means you've got to show up for a demo and show every single feature and function and show how each dropdown works, and actually teach you at the end of an hour that you can go use the product yourself. And actually, the sales process is not about teaching and enabling you to do the work. It's about convincing you that we've got a whole product suite here that will match. And so, I think great SE leaders that are coming for transformation, or, why I might come to you guys for consulting work, is to help me kind of boil down the product message into what are the salient things where a demo Actually, it could be like 3 PowerPoint slides of screenshots because we're not going to click through all the things. We're going to show you the report and tell you how that changes your business instead of showing you the 20 clicks that get you to that report. And so I think that's a typical breakdown that we see with SE teams that have grown up for a long time with the product is, hey, we just launched this new feature. I got to show you this feature. And next week, I got to show you this next one. And suddenly I've got this laundry list of things I've got to show you instead of business problems I'm trying to solve.
When I first started my career, I actually came from computer training background, right? So my approach was always, well, let me show you the value of this and all these different things. And I found out really quickly that that was not really helpful when you're trying to move the sales cycle along. So that was one thing that I learned. And as I look at problems or, with companies that are just starting to develop their SE teams, a lot of times the first SE is like someone from product, or it's still the founder doing the demos, or, it's someone doing the demo who knows it very well, but again, doesn't know how to appropriately censor and just tell the salient points and the value associated with them, right? And I think that's really the skill. One of our offerings that we have that we've given to some of our clients is kind of almost like a fractional SE, head of SE service, where, because it's such an important role to hire for and to hire right, especially in the beginning when you're trying to ramp very quickly. Making a mistake in that area doesn't necessarily kill the business, but you miss a lot of opportunity in the market, I think, by the time you figure out this is not the right person, this is not the right messaging, this is not the right thing. So having us come in, who 25 years each, as a leader who can come in and distill it down very quickly, I think is a very valuable thing. What are your thoughts about that? And where do you see applicability for that in the market or some of the customers and companies that you work with?
I think it's really helpful for a couple of reasons. First is that fractional model gives you a chance to hire someone with really deep expertise who's been at the biggest and the best companies, but not have to keep paying that salary year after year after year, because a lot of the impact you're looking for is a one-time transformation. And I've got to pay that top dollar for the great skill. For the transformational work that might last 3 months, 6 months, or a year, but then I'm going to let that machine run for a couple of years where it's a waste of that person's time and talent, and honestly paying too much to have them kind of keep cranking the engine. So I think that's really helpful just from a financial investment standpoint. I also think it's hugely helpful to have an independent third party in everything that we do.
Absolutely.
So in my career, I had worked at this company, Runtimer International, and they were this vehicle reimbursement solution. If you've ever gotten paid 65 cents to drive your car, Runtimer is a company that set that rate for the IRS. And back when I was working there, our pitch felt like we had to show you exactly how the sausage was made. We would go on for, an hour about, we collect data from 10 different insurance agencies, and we track the price of gas from 100,000 service stations, and we manipulate it, and we do all of this stuff, and then boom, out comes the end. And after I left that company, I did something completely different for about 5 years. And then I was recruited to a company called Modus, which was a competitor of Runtimer's, and they were just acquiring Runtimer. They asked me to come be the CRO of this new combined company. I sat down with the Modus team and I said, show me your sales pitch. And I was fully expecting, you drive your car 5 days out of 7 day week, and there's a 72.5 cent, blah, 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 blah. And the sales rep just had like one slide that said, the price of gas downtown Chicago is different than the price of gas in Paintsville, Arkansas. We recognize that, and we've calculated the difference. That's why we're going to reimburse this person 65 cents and this person 42 cents. And the sales pitch was done in 10 minutes. I thought to myself, I was like, how? That's never going to work. And the customer immediately just said, yep, makes a ton of sense. Let's buy it and move on to the next. It really taught me a lesson that sometimes you're way too close to your own solution, that if you have someone from the outside who can see it in a different way and boil it down in a simplified manner, they might save you time, money, get you more effective, and show you something that you didn't know about yourself.
Well, we appreciate the vote of confidence there in terms of the value of what we're offering. We're reaching our time, but before we do, I do want to mention the fact that you also have just released a book. In fact, you were very helpful for us in terms of our process of writing and releasing the book as well. But I do want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about the book that you have put out.
The book is called The CRO's Guide to Winning in Private Equity, and it's a collection of all of the templates and processes that I wind up consulting our CROs with every day. So if you're a sales leader who has just been bought by private equity or operates in private equity, it's a whole selection of templates you can download and implement today to change your business. Or if you're a sales manager who aspires to become a CRO, it provides some of that insight into what the day-to-day job looks like and some of the skills you might want to pick up as you contemplate that career transition.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. JD, if someone wanted to get in touch with you after this, what would be the best way? Through LinkedIn?
You'll find me on my personal website, which is jdmillerphd.com. And you'll find me on all of the socials with that same handle, just jdmillerphd.
All right, we'll put a link into the description of the podcast as well. But hey, thanks so much, JD. It's always a pleasure talking with you. It's been fun seeing you grow over the years into the different roles, but we've always been able to maintain a friendship. I really appreciate that.
I appreciate being with you. Thanks so much.
Okay, just as a wrap up, please, if you did enjoy this podcast, please, like, subscribe, follow, share, comment. The more feedback we get, the better. So we know what resonates with you and what are the things you'd like us to talk about. But to that end, thank you so much for joining us this week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care, folks.